Beneath layers of soil, where roots twist and stones rest untouched for millennia, a human story lingers in silence. Archaeologists, brushing carefully at the earth, reveal a fragile skeleton, bones turned pale and brittle with time. Beside the ribcage, where once a heart had beat, lies something unexpected, a smooth black stone. It has no markings, no carvings, no obvious use. It is ordinary, and yet, it is extraordinary. For this same dark stone, or one almost exactly like it, has been found again and again, in burials scattered across time, across continents, across the very dawn of humanity. Why? Why would the first mourners, tens of thousands of years ago, choose to place such an object with their dead? Was it a tool? Was it a token? Or was it something more, a silent offering to a mystery no words could capture? The black stone is heavy in the palm, darker than soil, darker even than night under a moonless sky. It feels eternal, as though it has existed unchanged since the earth's very beginning. Imagine a grieving hand pressing it, holding it tightly, before laying it down beside the still body of a loved one. In that gesture, in that silence, meaning was given. The stone became more than stone. It became memory. It became symbol. Unlike wood or cloth, which vanish with decay, unlike flowers that crumble into dust, the black stone endures. Long after flesh melts back into earth, after entire cultures rise and fall, the stone remains. This endurance may be part of its mystery. Perhaps our ancestors chose it not because it was rare, but because it was indestructible. Perhaps it was a promise, that something of the person would remain unbroken, held in the permanence of stone. Other objects, too, appear in early graves. We find necklaces of beads carved from shells. We find bones painted red with ochre, as though bathed in the color of blood and life. We find tools, blades, the necessities of survival. These objects speak clearly of art, of ceremony, of continuity. But the black stone does not speak. It only sits, mute and plain. No decoration, no alteration, no explanation. And yet, its very silence may have been its power. For silence itself has meaning. Picture a mother in prehistory, her child gone cold in her arms. Picture a father, or a companion, or a friend. Around them the fire flickers, shadows twist along the cave walls. They place the body down into the shallow earth. What can they leave behind? They have no flowers, no scriptures, no written prayers. But they have this stone, smooth and dark, waiting nearby. One of them picks it up, weighs it in the palm. Something in its heaviness feels right. Something in its darkness feels true. And so, gently, they lay it down beside the dead. That act echoes across tens of thousands of years. We cannot know the words they spoke. We cannot know the tears they shed. But we can still see the stone they chose. Even archaeologists, hardened by years of excavation, pause when they encounter such finds. A skull is unearthed, the fragile jawbone broken with age, and then, a dark gleam beside it. Some scientists dismissed these stones at first, writing them off as accidents, random pieces of geology caught in the grave. But again and again, across sites far apart, the stones appeared in deliberate placement. Too many times to be coincidence. They were chosen. They were placed. And they meant something. But what? The enigma lingers unresolved. Some think the stones symbolized night, the eternal sleep. Some think they marked protection, warding off spirits. Some whisper that perhaps they carried the memory of fallen stars, dark fragments of sky made solid. Whatever the truth, the black stone feels like more than an artifact. It feels like a mirror, reflecting the mystery of human thought at its very beginning. When we hold such a stone today, in a museum or in the soil itself, we are touching not just geology, but grief, hope, and meaning woven into its weight. We are touching the moment when humanity first reached for something beyond survival, when we first tried to speak to the silence of death. The bones may crumble, the names are lost forever, but the black stone remains. Waiting, watching, whispering only with its presence. And so, the question remains, suspended between past and present. What story do these stones carry? Why did our ancestors place them in the earth, again and again, as companions for the dead? Perhaps the answer lies not in the stone itself, but in us, those who continue to wonder, those who cannot help but search for meaning in silence. When we speak of the first burials, we step into the threshold of humanity itself. For a long time, our ancestors lived and died without leaving behind signs of ritual. Bodies may have been abandoned to scavengers, or buried shallowly by chance. But at some point, a profound shift occurred. People began to dig with intention. They began to place their dead carefully into the earth. And with that act, something invisible but unmistakable emerged, the birth of symbolic thought, the dawn of meaning woven into death. The earliest graves we know of belong not only to Homo sapiens but also to our close cousins, the Neanderthals. In places like Shanidar Cave in Iraq, skeletal remains from more than 50,000 years ago were found in shallow pits. Around them, traces of pollen suggest that flowers may have been laid with the bodies. Elsewhere, in caves across Europe and the Middle East, Neanderthal burials hint at a kind of reverence, a respect for the dead that seems strikingly familiar. For Homo sapiens, the evidence becomes even clearer. In the caves of Kafza and Skul in Israel, burials more than 100,000 years old show deliberate placement of the dead. In some cases, red ochre was sprinkled over the bodies, as though to paint them in the color of blood, of life, of renewal. These were not accidents. These were not random. They were intentional acts of mourning and meaning. What is striking is how these burials begin to accumulate objects alongside the bodies: beads made of shells, carved bone tools, animal parts, perhaps meant as offerings or companions. And among them, again and again, we find something simpler: stones. Sometimes red ochre stones, sometimes quartz, sometimes dark heavy rocks. Among these, the recurring presence of the black stone stands out, not carved, not shaped, but deliberately chosen. Why would early humans do this? Why, at the very threshold of symbolic thought, did they feel the need to place anything at all with their dead? The answer perhaps lies in the human condition itself. Burial is not merely a practical act. It is an acknowledgement that life and death are more than biology. To bury someone is to admit that absence has meaning, that grief seeks expression, that love and memory cannot simply vanish. The earliest graves are evidence not only of bodies laid to rest but of minds awakening to questions far larger than survival. Consider the contrast. An ordinary body left unburied is consumed by time. It disappears into the wilderness. But a body placed carefully in the earth, marked with offerings, becomes something else entirely. It becomes a story, a statement, a gesture toward something eternal. And the black stone placed with it becomes a part of that gesture. These burials also reveal something profound about community. To bury is to gather, to pause, to remember together. Imagine a small band of hunter-gatherers pausing their migration to dig a grave. Imagine them choosing objects from their surroundings to place beside the deceased. The act itself is as much for the living as for the dead. It binds the group, it expresses their shared grief, and it projects a sense of continuity, that death is not the end of belonging. When archaeologists first uncovered these early graves, debates raged. Were they true burials, or accidents of geology? Were the objects deliberately placed, or simply debris that fell into pits? But as evidence accumulated across sites and centuries, the picture grew clearer. Again and again, across distant lands and different peoples, intentional burial practices emerged. This was not coincidence. This was culture. This was mind. And always, the stones. The black stone, resting in the soil, does not tell us its meaning directly. But in the context of these first graves, its presence becomes luminous. It sits alongside beads, bones, ochre, as part of the earliest symbolic vocabulary of humanity. And unlike beads, which adorn, or tools, which serve, the stone is silent. Its meaning is more elusive, more abstract. Perhaps it was chosen for its permanence. Perhaps for its color. Perhaps for something we can never truly recover. But the fact remains, in the very first graves of our kind, as human beings took their first steps into the realm of memory and ritual, the black stone was there. It witnessed the birth of morning. It witnessed the first gestures toward eternity. It witnessed the transformation of death from biological end into spiritual threshold. The first graves of our kind are not just archaeological sites. They are mirrors. In them, we glimpse the beginning of ourselves, our grief, our questions, our longing to hold on to what is lost. And in the dark stillness of the black stone, we glimpse the persistence of that longing, stretching unbroken across 100,000 years. From the moment humans began to bury their dead, they also began to surround those burials with meaning. Across the Paleolithic world, objects appear again and again as offerings, shells carved into beads, bones polished smooth, pigments of ochre rubbed across the body like paint. These were not the necessities of survival. They were symbols, chosen deliberately to speak when words did not exist. Symbolism was humanity's first language. Long before writing, before spoken myths or painted epics, there was the gesture, the placement of a bead, the stroke of red pigment, the quiet laying of a stone. These gestures carried weight not because of what the objects were in themselves, but because of what they represented in the minds of those who gave them. Among these earliest symbolic tools, the black stone is striking for its simplicity. Unlike ochre, it does not dazzle with color. Unlike beads, it is not transformed by human hands into ornament. Unlike carved figurines, it carries no visible image. It is pure, unadorned matter. And yet, its repeated presence in graves tells us it was more than matter. It was chosen, lifted from the ground, held, and laid with the dead. In that act, the stone crossed the boundary from object to symbol. Why would such simplicity matter so much? Perhaps because the stone's very plainness invited meaning. A bead says beauty. Ochre says life. A figurine says story. But a black stone says nothing. It is an empty vessel, a silence into which humans could pour whatever meaning they needed. Protection, memory, eternity, the night sky, the earth itself. Its ambiguity may have been its greatest strength. Archaeologists studying prehistoric symbolism often focus on the vivid, the red handprints on cave walls, the intricate carvings of bone and ivory, the dazzling necklaces of shells carried hundreds of miles inland. But the black stone belongs to a different category, a quiet category of meaning, where the absence of detail is the message. Like silence in music or empty space in art, the black stone may have been powerful precisely because it resisted interpretation. There is also the element of touch. A smooth black stone fits easily into the palm. It is cool, heavy, grounding. In a world of uncertainty, where life was precarious and death sudden, perhaps the stone's solidity offered comfort. To hold it was to hold something unchanging. To place it with the dead was to give them a companion that could not decay, a fragment of permanence in a world of loss. Across cultures, long after the Paleolithic, stones have carried symbolic weight. In some traditions, black stones were seen as protective charms. In others, they represented ancestors, permanence, or the boundary between life and death. We cannot assume direct continuity across tens of thousands of years, but we can see a thread. Humanity has always looked at stones and seen more than geology. The phrase stone as symbol, stone as spirit captures this transformation. For early humans, the black stone may have been both a symbol of something larger and a vessel believed to carry a presence within it. Spirit did not need to be sculpted, it could be hidden in plain sight, sleeping in a pebble. Consider how different this is from the world of survival tools. A blade must be sharp, a spear must be straight, a fire must burn hot. Their value is functional. The black stone, by contrast, had no function. Its value lay in meaning alone. And that difference marks one of the great thresholds of human evolution, the ability to treat an object not as tool, but as sign. When we see a black stone in an ancient grave, we are seeing both halves of this transformation. On one hand, it is symbol, representing something beyond itself. On the other, it is spirit, treated as though it carried an unseen essence, a presence beyond its physical form. This duality may explain why such ordinary objects were treated with such care. In this way, the black stone is not only a fragment of prehistory, it is a fragment of the human mind at its very beginnings, a clue to how we first saw the world not only as it is, but as it might mean. And so, the black stone sits at the threshold of imagination. Neither tool nor ornament, it is the first whisper of spirit in matter, a reminder that, long before we wrote words or carved gods, we were already searching for meaning in the most silent of things. Pick up a black stone, smooth and heavy, and hold it in your hand. Close your fingers around it. Feel its weight settle into your palm, pressing down with the quiet certainty of something older than yourself. It does not sparkle like quartz. It does not shine like gold. It does not call attention to itself. And yet, there is something magnetic in its simplicity, something that makes you want to keep holding it, to roll it between your fingers, to feel the cold permanence of its surface. For the people of prehistory, this sensation would have been no less striking. Imagine the daily world of an Ice Age hunter, the crackle of fire, the crunch of snow underfoot, the fleeting shadow of an animal across the plain. Most objects in that world were fragile, meat spoiled, wood rotted, hides tore, fire burned out. But the stone endured. In its stillness, it offered a sense of permanence in a world of constant change. The color, too, would have mattered. Black absorbs the eye. It has depth, a darkness that seems to draw thought inward. Place a pale bone next to it, or a red ochre-stained pebble, and the black stone stands apart. Its darkness is not lively or bright. It is quiet, absorbing, endless. In the glow of firelight, it would have seemed almost otherworldly, a fragment of night itself made tangible. To hold such a stone was to hold a piece of silence. Archaeologists today can analyze composition and mineral content. They can tell whether the stone was basalt, obsidian, or some darker river pebble. But no scientific test can capture what it felt like to cradle that darkness in the palm. For meaning is not always carved into the object, it is carved into the mind of the one who holds it. There is something universal about this instinct. Even now, people are drawn to stones. Children pick them up from riverbeds, choosing one that feels special for no reason they can explain. Hikers pocket a pebble from the summit of a mountain. Mourners leave small stones on graves. The attraction is not practical. It is emotional. Something about the solidity, the texture, the weight connects us to permanence, to memory, to the ground beneath our feet. Now imagine this impulse 100,000 years ago. A band of humans sits around a fire in the mouth of a cave. The body of a loved one lies nearby, wrapped in skins. One person reaches down and lifts a dark stone, heavier than it looks. They roll it in their hand, perhaps comforted by its coolness, its quiet presence. And when the grave is dug, they place it gently with the body. In that moment, the stone becomes more than geology. It becomes a vessel of memory, an extension of grief, a token of connection. Its darkness would have been especially evocative. In many cultures throughout history, black has symbolized the unknown, the hidden, the eternal. It is the color of night, when the world falls silent and mysterious. It is the color of soil, the womb of the earth where seeds die and are reborn. For prehistoric people, who lived so closely with cycles of light and dark, life and death, this symbolism may have emerged instinctively. A black stone in the grave could embody night's eternal rest, or the fertile earth receiving the body back into its embrace. But the stone was not only symbol, it was experience. Its smoothness, its weight, its darkness were all tactile, sensory qualities that made it feel alive in the hand. Unlike a carved figurine, which must be shaped with effort, the black stone required no transformation. Its power lay in its natural state. By picking it up, humans discovered spirit already present in the world. This simplicity is perhaps why the black stone endured as a burial companion. A bead might break, a carving might crumble, but the stone remained unaltered, eternal. To touch it was to touch something unchanged, something that had existed long before humans and would exist long after. In times of grief, such permanence might have offered a fragile comfort. Think of the contrast. The human body, soft and mortal, lying still in the earth, beside it, the stone, hard and enduring, resisting decay. Together, they told a story without words, a story of mortality and eternity, of what fades and what remains. Perhaps this is why, even now, when we hold a black stone, we feel a quiet gravity. It is not simply a rock. It is a reminder of permanence, a reminder of silence, a reminder of death, and of the hope that something endures beyond it. In the palm, darkness becomes touchable. And in that darkness, the first humans found meaning. For more than a century, archaeologists have brushed soil from bones and uncovered black stones lying beside them. Each time, the same question rises: why? What purpose did this simple object serve in the earliest graves of humanity? It is a question that refuses to die. Generations of scholars have tried to answer it. Some suggest the stones were tools, hammers, pounders, or fragments of weapons, accidentally buried with the body. Others propose they were tokens, chosen deliberately as offerings or symbols. Still others argue that the stones were markers of identity, signifying clan lineage or the individual's place in the community. Each theory seems possible, and yet, none is certain. The problem is silence. The people who buried these stones left us no words, no texts, no inscriptions to explain their actions. Their language, if they had one, has vanished into the air. Their gestures, if they carried ritual meaning, are frozen in the ground but not in memory. All we have is the stone itself, mute and enduring. And yet, perhaps that silence is the point. Some archaeologists insist that the meaning of the black stone can never be solved, that we are projecting our modern imaginations onto something far older than ourselves. But others see the very persistence of the stone as evidence of importance. Across different times and different places, from Europe to Africa to Asia, the black stone keeps reappearing. This cannot be coincidence. It suggests a pattern. It suggests intention. And so, the question lives on. Even outside the halls of academia, the black stone has captured the imagination of writers, philosophers, and spiritual thinkers. They too have asked, was it a charm against evil spirits, a fragment of night meant to guide the soul into the dark, or a symbol of eternity, chosen precisely because it would last when all else decayed? We may never know. And yet, the question matters. For in asking why the stone was placed, we are really asking something larger. Why do humans create meaning at all? Why do we take ordinary objects, stones, pigments, bones, and transform them into vessels of memory and spirit? The black stone is one mystery, but behind it lies the greater mystery of the human mind. Think of how many generations this question has passed through. The first archaeologists of the 19th century, kneeling in muddy caves with lanterns, the scholars of the 20th, analyzing graves with microscopes and carbon dating, the researchers of today, armed with DNA analysis, scanning electron microscopes, and computer modeling. Each generation adds data, but the black stone itself remains elusive. It does not yield. It sits silent in the soil, unchanging, while human curiosity circles endlessly around it. There is something almost poetic about this. The stone, an object of permanence, is matched by the permanence of our questioning. As long as humans continue to wonder about their beginnings, the black stone will continue to provoke thought. It may never give us an answer, but it gives us something else: continuity. A dialogue between past and present, bound by silence. Imagine one of those early mourners placing the stone in the grave. They could not have known that tens of thousands of years later, strangers would unearth it and puzzle over their gesture. And yet, here we are. Their act, simple and silent, has outlived them in a way words cannot. It has forced us to remember them, not as anonymous bones, but as thinkers, dreamers, mourners like ourselves. The question, then, is not only about the stone. It is about us. Why do we keep asking? Why does this mystery draw us in? Perhaps because in the black stone we see reflected our own need to find meaning in death, to believe that objects, gestures, and memories can reach across the abyss of loss. The question refuses to die because it is the same question humanity has always asked: what happens when life ends, and how do we hold on to what is lost? The black stone is only one version of that question, pressed into the soil of deep time. And so, as we close the first act of this journey, the mystery remains unresolved. The stone waits, silent, unyielding, heavy in the earth. We may never know why it was placed there. But perhaps that is the point. Some mysteries are not meant to be solved. They are meant to be lived with, like grief, like love, like death itself. The black stone rests in the soil, and with it rests a question that refuses to die. Every great mystery begins with a single discovery. For the story of the black stones, that moment came in the early days of archaeology, when explorers and scholars first began to peel back the layers of earth in search of our origins. Picture the scene: the late 19th century, in a dimly lit cave somewhere in Europe. The floor is damp, littered with animal bones and shards of flint. A team of men in heavy coats and worn boots crouch with lanterns, their faces flickering in the glow. They are expecting bones, perhaps the remains of prehistoric animals, or even the fabled cave men whispered about in scientific circles. What they do not expect is what they find beside the bones. The archaeologist's brush uncovers the outline of a skeleton curled in the fetal position, as if still asleep. Around the skull, fragments of ochre stain the soil a deep red. And then, near the ribs, the lantern light catches something darker still, a smooth black stone, resting as if deliberately placed. At first, there is confusion. Could this stone have fallen from the cave roof? Could it be debris washed in by water? But its position is too exact, too intimate. It lies directly against the body, almost cradled by the bones. This is no accident. The archaeologists record the find with careful notes, sketches, and measurements. But behind the scientific language there is awe. For in that moment, they realize they are not simply looking at bones. They are looking at thought, at intention, at one of the earliest glimpses into the symbolic world of our species. In the decades that followed, similar discoveries began to appear. At site after site, in different regions, black stones emerged in graves. Some were large pebbles, others small fragments, but always they seemed deliberately placed, sometimes by the head, sometimes in the hands, sometimes against the chest. The pattern was undeniable. This first wave of discoveries ignited debates that continue to this day. What did the stones mean? Were they sacred tokens, offerings for the journey into death? Were they symbols of the night, of eternity, of the earth itself? Or were they simply objects of comfort, chosen for their weight and smoothness, given to the dead as one might give a keepsake? To understand the impact of that first find, we must imagine the mindset of those early archaeologists. In the 19th century, the idea that prehistoric humans were capable of symbolic thought was controversial. Many still believed that our ancestors were little more than animals, driven only by survival. But here, in a cave beside ancient bones, was evidence that they mourned, remembered, and created meaning. A stone, simple as it was, forced scholars to reconsider what it meant to be human. The black stone was not gold, nor jewel, nor carved idol. It was something far humbler. And perhaps that humility was its power. It suggested that meaning did not have to come from wealth or ornament. It could come from the most ordinary object, transformed by the hand and heart that placed it. Let us pause and imagine the first person who ever placed such a stone. A figure crouches beside a shallow grave, lit only by fire. They pick up a stone from the ground, weigh it in their palm, and, for reasons we can only guess, decide it belongs with the body. The gesture is small, almost invisible. And yet, it echoes across tens of thousands of years, reaching us even now. The first discovery of the black stone was not only an archaeological event, it was a philosophical one. It challenged the assumption that prehistory was silent, that the minds of early humans were closed to mystery and ritual. It revealed that even in the deepest past, people were already wrestling with questions of life and death, memory and meaning. From that day onward, every excavation that uncovered a black stone carried with it the weight of that first moment. Each new find confirmed that the pattern was not isolated, not random. It was part of a larger story, a thread woven through human history. And so the mystery deepened. The first shard beneath the bones opened a doorway into a question that still stands before us. What did the black stone mean? Archaeologists may debate, theories may shift, but the image remains vivid, a skeleton curled in earth, and beside it a dark stone, waiting in silence. That first find, humble though it seemed, became the spark that lit a fire of wonder, one that still burns in the minds of those who seek to understand the beginnings of the human soul. The first black stone may have been found in a European cave, but as the years passed something remarkable began to emerge. The discoveries were not confined to one place, nor to one culture. They appeared everywhere, scattered across continents, across millennia, across the divides of language, tradition, and geography. And yet, despite all these differences, the stones were the same, dark, smooth, and placed deliberately with the dead. This was no local quirk. This was something far larger. Imagine the sweep of human prehistory. On the savannas of Africa, early burials show signs of ochre, beads, and bones carefully arranged. In Europe, caves hold curled skeletons clutching black stones. In Asia, shallow graves preserve bodies surrounded by pebbles of the same hue. Thousands of miles apart, with no shared communication, people were performing similar rituals. The black stone was not bound by borders. It was something deeper, something universal. Archaeologists call these patterns convergences, moments when human groups, separated by time and distance, arrive at similar solutions. Fire is one example, the bow and arrow another. And here, in the dark soil of ancient graves, lies yet another convergence, the act of placing a dark stone with the dead. The question, of course, is why? Did the black stone hold some natural symbolism that any human could feel, regardless of culture? Was it the color, the deep, void-like black evoking night, mystery, the unseen? Was it the weight and permanence, a counterpoint to the fragile and fleeting body? Or was it something simpler, born of touch, the smooth coolness in the hand, the reassurance of holding something unchanged in a changing world? The pattern cannot be ignored. Whether in the sands of Africa, the lush plains of China, or the caves of Europe, the stones appear. Always black, always close to the body, always suggestive of meaning. And yet each discovery carries its own unique fingerprint. In some graves, the stones are arranged in circles. In others, a single pebble rests upon the chest. In rare cases, stones are clutched in both hands, as if the dead were holding onto them for a journey ahead. The gestures differ, but the choice of object remains constant, the black stone. To the early archaeologists, these convergences were both thrilling and unsettling. Thrilling, because they hinted at a shared human instinct stretching across continents. Unsettling, because they challenged the neat boundaries scholars often prefer to draw, dividing peoples into this culture and that culture, separate and distinct. The stones seemed to suggest something else, that beneath all diversity, there was a unity of spirit, a shared response to death. This is where the black stones transcend archaeology and move into philosophy. What does it mean that cultures with no knowledge of one another performed the same act? Does it suggest that the human mind, no matter where or when it exists, carries the same longing for permanence, for symbol, for ritual? It is as if humanity, scattered across the globe, whispered the same word in 100 different tongues, and that word was spoken through stone. Some researchers have tried to explain the convergence through environment. Perhaps black stones were simply more available in certain landscapes. Perhaps volcanic glass, basalt, or river-polished pebbles were abundant, making them a convenient choice. But this explanation falls short, for while the materials differ, obsidian in one place, river rock in another, the color, the deliberate choice of black, remains constant. Color is not coincidence. Color is meaning. To see the scattered yet united pattern of black stones is to glimpse something profound about the human story. It is not the story of separate peoples inventing rituals in isolation. It is the story of a shared humanity facing the same mystery of death and reaching for the same response. The stones remind us that though divided by oceans, mountains, and time, we are not as different as we seem. The same impulses stir within us, the need to mark loss, to create memory, to find symbols in the natural world that speak to the unspeakable. And so, when we trace the black stones across the map, we are not simply cataloging artifacts. We are tracing a web of invisible threads, binding the earliest humans together, Africa to Asia, Europe to the Americas. Separate, yes, but united too. Scattered yet united, that is the paradox of the black stones. Each one lies in its own grave, belonging to its own community, shaped by its own landscape. Yet together, they form a pattern larger than any single culture, a chorus rising from the depths of prehistory. When we hold one of these stones today, in the sterile light of a museum, or the careful hands of an archaeologist, we are not just holding rock. We are holding a connection, a reminder that beneath the scatter of history lies a unity that defies time, distance, and even death itself. By now, the mystery of the black stones has grown too large to be dismissed as coincidence. Their presence in one region could be explained away as cultural habit. Their appearance in another could be chalked up to chance. But when the same ritual is found again and again, in distant lands separated by oceans and by millennia, the pattern demands a new kind of attention. The black stones were not confined to one cradle of humanity. They were global. Let us travel. From the caves of Europe we cross the Mediterranean to North Africa, where burials dating back tens of thousands of years reveal their own mysteries, bodies laid to rest with beads of seashells, pigments of red ochre, and there, small black pebbles placed deliberately near the skull. The symbolism is unmistakable. Further east, in the Fertile Crescent of Mesopotamia, we find another chapter. Graves from early settlements reveal obsidian blades buried alongside the dead. But in some burials the obsidian has no cutting edge. It has been reshaped, smoothed, transformed from tool to token. These were not weapons. They were symbols. Silent black stones, resting with the departed. Across the steppes of Central Asia, where nomadic groups roamed for millennia, archaeologists have uncovered kurgans, burial mounds filled with treasures, weapons, horses, ornaments. And among them, the same quiet presence, dark stones, often clasped in the hand of the dead, as if carried into the afterlife as a talisman. Even further east, in the river valleys of ancient China, burials reveal patterns of jade and bone. But here too appear the black stones, river-smoothed pebbles, carefully selected for their deep color. Some were polished to gleaming perfection. Others were left raw, natural, unchanged. Yet all were placed with intent, as though their very blackness carried meaning across every culture that touched them. And then, across the ocean, the pattern appears again. In the Americas, long before the rise of great civilizations like the Maya or the Inca, early burial sites show bodies interred with objects of ritual. Among them, black stones, sometimes obsidian, sometimes basalt, sometimes river pebbles darkened by time. North to south, across deserts and mountains, the choice repeats. Always black, always deliberate. The effect is dizzying. What force could drive such a universal choice? These peoples had no contact, no shared language, no maps or caravans to bridge the seas between them. Yet the stones connect them like an invisible thread. One explanation is symbolic universality. Black, across cultures, has always carried weight. It is the color of the night sky, of shadow, of the unknown depths of caves and oceans. It is absence, silence, void. To place a black stone with the dead is to acknowledge the journey into darkness, to mark death with a physical echo of night itself. Another explanation lies in geology. Black stones are often volcanic in origin, born of fire, pressure, and time. Obsidian, basalt, hematite, each one a child of the Earth's most violent processes. To ancient peoples, these were not inert objects. They were fragments of fire frozen in time, proof of nature's hidden power. To carry such a stone into death was to carry a piece of the earth's strength itself. Yet another possibility is tactile. Imagine a smooth black stone in your hand, cool to the touch, weighty, yet perfectly fitted to the palm. There is comfort in it, reassurance in its permanence. Perhaps our ancestors, holding such stones, felt their durability and longed to pass it on to their dead, a gift of stability against the fragility of life. And still, the question lingers, how do we explain the sheer reach of the practice? Did it arise once, long ago, and spread slowly through migration, carried from one group to the next until it circled the globe? Or did it arise independently, again and again, each culture arriving at the same symbolic choice because the human mind, no matter where it dwells, moves along similar paths when it confronts the mystery of death? Most scholars lean toward convergence, separate beginnings, shared conclusions. And yet, there is something haunting about the other possibility, that this ritual is not just human invention, but memory. A memory so old it lies buried in the bones of our species, passed down not by words or traditions, but by instinct itself. When we look across continents and cultures, we see the stones repeating like an echo, a whisper that began tens of thousands of years ago and never ceased. Wherever humans went, the stones followed. Think of what that means. From the icy tundra to the tropical rainforest, from deserts to mountains to coasts, people faced the same moment, the loss of someone they loved. And in that moment, across all differences, they reached for the same object, the same black stone. Perhaps the stones are not just relics of the dead. Perhaps they are relics of humanity itself, our first shared language, spoken not in words but in symbols. Across continents, across cultures, the black stones remind us of the one thing that unites us all, the inevitability of death, and the desperate, beautiful ways we try to give it meaning. What is a symbol? A symbol is more than an object. It is a bridge between the visible and the invisible, the material and the imagined. And if we listen closely to the story told by these black stones, scattered across continents and buried in graves older than writing itself, we may be staring at the first great symbol of death. Consider the simplicity of it. A black stone has no words carved into it, no intricate design, no craftsmanship that marks it as human-made. And yet, to place it in a grave transforms it instantly from nature into meaning. It ceases to be a stone, and it becomes a message. The color black itself carries weight. To the living of the Paleolithic world, black was everywhere. It was the color of the cave's deepest chambers, where flickering torchlight faded to nothing. It was the color of night, when predators roamed and the stars were the only light. It was the color of burned wood after fire, a powerful force reduced to silence. Black was absence, negation, mystery. Now imagine holding a black stone in your hand as you stand over the body of the dead. You feel its coolness, its weight, its durability. You see its darkness, its reflection of night and shadow. To place it with the body is to mark the passage from one state to another, from presence into absence, from life into silence. The stone becomes not just a token, but a statement. This person has entered the dark. It is, in essence, a symbol of death. And what makes this moment profound is that it may be the earliest symbol of death that humanity ever created. Before crosses, before funeral pyres, before pyramids and mausoleums and tombstones, there was the black stone. The anthropologist may remind us that red ochre too has been found in burials, smeared across bones as a sign of blood, life, or rebirth. And they are right. But ochre is symbolic abundance. It speaks of fertility, of continuity, of life continuing even after death. The black stone, by contrast, is stark. It does not promise continuation. It does not comfort with rebirth. It simply acknowledges, death is real. This, perhaps, is why it mattered so much. For the first time in history, humans faced death not only with fear or grief, but with symbolism. They sought to externalize it, to take the inexpressible and give it form. To face mortality is to face the ultimate void. And the stone, silent, solid, black, was the perfect vessel for that void. But here we must pause and reflect on what this means for the human mind. Symbols do not emerge by accident. They are not instinct, like the migration of birds or the spinning of a spider's web. They are invention, abstraction. They require imagination, the ability to connect a physical thing to an invisible idea. The black stone tells us not only about death, but about the awakening of symbolic thought itself. The first symbol of death is also the first symbol of meaning. And from this seed, all of culture would eventually grow. Now let us look deeper into why black stone specifically could have risen to this role. Their permanence is undeniable. Unlike wood, which rots, or flowers, which wither, a stone endures. To place a stone with the dead is to offer a gesture of permanence in the face of impermanence. It says, though this life is gone, something will remain. There is also something universal about the feel of stone. Across ages and continents, to hold one in the hand is to feel connection with the earth itself. Perhaps our ancestors sensed that in burying the dead with stone, they were returning them to the earth in a more complete way, not only into soil, but into the very bedrock of the world. And then there is the color black. Black stones, unlike pale ones, stand out in their strangeness. They are unusual, marked, different. They are visible against the lighter shades of bone, sand, and soil. They are the shadows made tangible. Together, permanence and darkness combine into a perfect symbolic object. The stone becomes death itself, silent, enduring, incomprehensible. But perhaps the most haunting idea of all is this: in choosing these stones, humanity may have been choosing not simply a symbol of death, but the first attempt to domesticate death, to hold it, to make it smaller, to bind it into a single object that could be touched, understood, and placed deliberately. The black stone does not remove the fear of death, but it gives it shape. Imagine the scene again: a child lost, a parent gone, a hunter killed. The living gather, grief heavy in their chests. Someone steps forward with a small stone, dark and gleaming. They place it with the body, and in that gesture, the inexpressible becomes visible. Death has a token now, something you can see, something you can touch, the first symbol of death. And what makes this even more profound is that it connects us across time. When we look at these burials today, when archaeologists uncover a black stone nestled against ancient bones, we are not only uncovering the past, we are uncovering the moment when humans first began to think in symbols, first began to confront mortality in ways deeper than instinct. It was the dawn of symbolic humanity. The black stone marks a turning point. It is not just an artifact, not just a ritual. It is a declaration. It tells us that even in the Paleolithic world, life was already lived in the shadow of death, and death was already given meaning through symbol. All later funerary traditions, the pyramids of Egypt, the funeral mounds of China, the tombs of Greece and Rome, can be traced back to this primal moment. This is where it began, a pebble, black and silent, chosen to carry the weight of the greatest mystery of all. And so, when we call it the first symbol of death, we are not exaggerating. We are naming the birth of something extraordinary, the human ability to turn silence into meaning, absence into presence, and death into symbol. If there was ever a material that seemed to belong more to the world of gods than to the world of men, it was obsidian. Smooth, black, and sharper than any blade of bronze or iron could ever be, obsidian was the Stone Age's paradox, as old as the earth, and yet as cutting-edge as the future. When our ancestors found it, volcanic glass born in the heart of fire, they must have felt both awe and fear. It was unlike any other stone. Where most rocks were dull and rough, obsidian shone with a dark brilliance. Its surface was reflective, almost mirror-like, yet at its heart it was black as night. It fractured with a conchoidal curve, breaking into shards with edges so sharp they could slice flesh with surgical precision. Even today, modern surgeons occasionally use obsidian scalpels, finer than the keenest steel. Imagine, then, what it must have meant for early humans tens of thousands of years ago to stumble upon such a material. To them, obsidian was alive. It was born in violence, in volcanic eruptions that shook the earth and split the sky. Lightning, thunder, and rivers of fire, all of this was the birthplace of obsidian. And so the stone carried within it a mythology of fire and power. When humans held it, they were holding a fragment of a volcano, a sliver of the earth's molten heart cooled into solid form. Is it any wonder, then, that obsidian became central to early ritual? For cutting, it was unmatched. A flake of obsidian could be fashioned into a blade finer than any metal yet discovered. Hunters used it to prepare meat, to scrape hides, to shape tools. But beyond utility, obsidian cut into the imagination. Its sharpness made it dangerous, almost supernatural. To bleed from an obsidian cut was to feel the bite of Earth's fire itself. And yet there was another quality, its beauty. Held in the light of dawn or fire, obsidian gleams, sometimes flashing hints of rainbow or silver along its surface. Some obsidian even carries golden streaks, or a sheen like stars trapped in stone. For early humans, this was no ordinary rock. This was a jewel of the gods. Placed in a grave, obsidian carried multiple meanings. It was practical, a blade for the dead to carry into whatever world lay beyond. It was protective, a weapon to guard against spirits or dangers on the journey. But it was also symbolic. Obsidian was fire turned to stone, darkness made permanent, a union of opposites. In this way, it perfectly embodied death itself, the end of life, yet also the transformation of energy, the fusion of destruction and endurance. But there is another layer, obsidian as a mirror. When polished, obsidian reveals reflections. Imagine the first time a Paleolithic human looked into a piece of polished black glass and saw their own face staring back. Unlike water, which ripples and distorts, obsidian reflected a still, uncanny image. To stare into it was to encounter the self, the soul, the double. In this reflection, early humans might have glimpsed not only their living face but also their own mortality. To place such a stone in a grave may have been to offer the dead a mirror, to see themselves as they crossed into another world. Cultures thousands of years later, from Mesoamerica to the Mediterranean, would still revere obsidian for this reason. The Aztecs carved obsidian mirrors and believed they could peer through them into other realms, into the future, into the domain of gods. But this reverence began much earlier. The graves of the Paleolithic whisper the same story, that obsidian was never just a tool, but a portal. Its duality, beauty and danger, light and darkness, reflection and sharpness, made it the perfect symbol for death. Death itself is a duality, feared and revered, destructive yet transformative, final yet mysterious. Obsidian captured all of this in a single silent object. Let us picture a burial. A hunter lies in the ground, his body surrounded by stone tools, ornaments, and, placed carefully by his side, a blade of obsidian. In the flickering firelight of the funeral gathering, that blade would shine, gleaming darkly against the soil. It would be a reminder to the living, here is power, here is mystery, here is the essence of fire itself. And when the earth covered the body, that obsidian blade remained hidden but enduring. Thousands of years later, when archaeologists uncovered it, they were struck not just by its beauty but by its persistence. Unlike wood, cloth, or bone, obsidian survives nearly unchanged. It is as sharp now as it was then, as dark, as luminous. It is as though obsidian resists time itself, as though it refuses to decay, just as the symbol of death refuses to vanish from human culture. But obsidian's power was not only physical or aesthetic, it was spiritual. By burying the dead with obsidian, humans might have believed they were arming the soul, giving it protection for the unknown journey ahead. The obsidian blade could cut through darkness, fend off spirits, or mark the dead as worthy of respect. At the same time, the obsidian stone could represent a bridge. In life, it connected people to the fire of the volcano. In death, it might connect them to another world, just as a mirror connects the self to the shadow. It was not only a weapon, not only a jewel, but a threshold. Even today, when we hold obsidian, we feel its strangeness. Its surface seems both empty and infinite, like staring into a starless night. Its sharpness reminds us of its danger. Its reflective sheen reminds us of ourselves. It is, in short, a stone that compels us to think, not just about the earth, but about mortality. This is why obsidian mattered. This is why it was chosen again and again as the black stone of the grave. It was the most potent material our ancestors could imagine, the perfect symbol for the transition between life and death. The power of obsidian was not just in its edge, or its shine, or its reflection. Its power was in what it told humanity about itself, that we were creatures capable of reverence, of fear, of symbolism. That we could take a fragment of a volcano, place it with our dead, and by that gesture declare that death was not only an ending but a mystery worth honoring. The black stone was not inert. It was alive with meaning. It was the breath of fire frozen into silence. It was death, captured and crystallized. This was the power of obsidian. If we wish to understand why the black stone appeared again and again in the graves of early humans, we must imagine not only the object itself but the gesture of placing it. Rituals are not accidents. They are deliberate acts, performed with weight and meaning, repeated until they become part of the fabric of culture. The black stone was not dropped into graves by chance. It was carried, selected, chosen, and laid with intention. Picture the scene: the fire burns low. A body rests on woven grass or in a hollow carved from the earth. Family and tribe gather close, silent, their faces painted with ash or ochre. In their hands they hold tokens, food for the journey, tools for protection, beads and ornaments of bone. And then, at the center of the ritual, comes the black stone. A hand reaches out, almost reverently, and places it upon the chest of the dead, or at their side, or near their head. It is more than a stone. It is a key, a talisman, a sign. Across the Paleolithic world, these gestures repeated. Sometimes the black stone was a pebble, smooth from river water, as if the living wanted to gift the dead a piece of flowing life. Sometimes it was obsidian, a razor-sharp fragment of volcanic fire, a weapon and mirror in one. Sometimes it was hematite, iron-rich and glimmering dark red when cut, echoing both blood and earth. The material might change, but the meaning endured. What meaning exactly? That is the mystery. Archaeologists debate endlessly, but what matters is less the precision than the presence. The act of burial with a black stone suggests that early humans believed death required preparation. The dead could not go empty-handed. A stone was not mere decoration, it was function, protection, identity. For some groups, perhaps the black stone was thought to weigh down the spirit, preventing it from wandering, keeping it close to the tribe. For others, it may have been a guide, marking the path into the shadow world. And for yet others, it may have been seen as a vessel, the stone itself carrying the soul or preserving memory. We cannot know exactly, but we can listen to the echoes of ritual. One echo is found in later cultures. Thousands of years after the first black stones were placed in graves, societies across the globe still performed strikingly similar acts. Egyptians buried their dead with scarabs carved from black stones, symbols of rebirth. The Greeks placed coins, often darkened by fire, upon the eyes of the deceased. The Celts buried polished jet beads alongside their loved ones. And in Mesoamerica, obsidian knives and mirrors accompanied kings and shamans into the afterlife. These practices, though separated by time and geography, share a root, the belief that objects could accompany the soul, that stones and tokens could bridge the gap between worlds. The Paleolithic black stone was perhaps the first whisper of this idea. We might think of it as the beginning of religion, not in the sense of organized faith, but in the sense of human beings acting as if life extended beyond death, as if gestures could shape the unseen. To place a black stone in a grave was to declare that the journey was not finished, that there was more beyond the silence of the earth. But the ritual was not only for the dead, it was also for the living. In gathering around the grave, in selecting the stone, in making the gesture, the community enacted their grief. They gave shape to sorrow. They transformed fear into ceremony. The black stone was a vessel for memory, not only the memory of the one who had passed, but the memory of the group itself, preserved through repetition. Imagine the child who watched their parents place a black stone in a grave. Years later, when another death came, that child would perform the same gesture, repeating what they had witnessed. The act became tradition. Tradition became culture. Culture became meaning. And all of it began with a simple stone, dark and enduring. There is also the question of selection. Not every stone was chosen. Archaeologists note that the black stones found in graves are often unusually smooth, or unusually sharp, or unusually striking in color. The people who selected them were discerning. They looked for stones that spoke. Perhaps they walked the riverbanks, searching for the perfect pebble, or chipped away at volcanic glass until the fragment gleamed just right. In that act of choosing, the living invested the stone with intention. It was not just black, it was the stone, the chosen one. And perhaps the ritual did not end at burial. Some scholars suggest that stones placed in graves could have been part of longer cycles of remembrance. A tribe might return to the burial ground, touch the stones, whisper names, or carry fragments to connect with ancestors. In this way, the stone was more than a grave good. It was a marker of continuity, a bridge between the living and the dead. Think of the psychological power of this. In a world of uncertainty, where life was fragile and death omnipresent, the ritual of the black stone provided stability. It offered a way to confront mortality not with chaos but with meaning. It allowed humans to say, we do not let go into nothing. We place something. We mark the passage. We remember. And so the black stone became more than a symbol. It became a language, a silent word, spoken at the threshold of life and death. A ritual act that told the living who they were, and told the dead that they were not forgotten. The stone and the soul, bound together through ritual. If the black stone was born in ritual, it was nurtured in exchange. For humans do not keep meaning to themselves. What is sacred to one group becomes desirable to another, and what is desirable begins to move, hand to hand, village to village, valley to valley. The story of the black stone is not only the story of burial and belief, it is also the story of trade. Of all the black stones, none traveled as widely as obsidian. Born in fire, obsidian is volcanic glass, sharp, fragile, luminous in its darkness. To the Paleolithic eye, it must have looked otherworldly. Where common stones were dull and rough, obsidian gleamed with an almost liquid shine. Strike it, and it shatters into edges sharper than a razor. In a time before metal, obsidian was the sharpest substance known to humans. It is no wonder, then, that obsidian became both tool and talisman, both weapon and ornament. To bury a body with obsidian was to arm them with fire's memory, to place in their hands a fragment of the Earth's molten heart. But obsidian was rare. It could only be found near volcanic sources, in mountains and craters scattered across the Earth. Not every group lived near such places. And so, from the earliest times, obsidian began to move. Archaeologists have traced its journeys. Chemical fingerprinting can identify the volcanic source of an obsidian blade or bead. In Anatolia, obsidian from Cappadocia has been found hundreds of kilometers away. In the Near East, obsidian from Armenia traveled across rivers and plains. In the Americas, obsidian from central Mexico has been unearthed in sites far beyond the reach of its volcanoes. These journeys tell us that long before there were roads or caravans, there were networks, webs of human connection through which sacred stones flowed. Imagine the scene. A small group arrives at the edge of a camp carrying bundles wrapped in hide. They open them to reveal the gleam of obsidian. Gasps ripple through the crowd. Hands reach out, testing edges, marveling at reflections. In return, the traders receive food, skins, pigments, shells, or perhaps other stones considered sacred. The obsidian moves on, carried to the next valley, the next tribe, the next burial ground. What began as a fragment of a volcano becomes a thread in a vast human tapestry. But trade was not only material. With the stones traveled stories. To hold an obsidian blade from a distant mountain was to hold a piece of another world. Perhaps it was said that the stone carried the breath of the volcano, or that it burned with the power of distant gods. Myths spread along the same paths as objects. In this way, the black stone became not just an item of exchange but a carrier of imagination, knitting together scattered groups into a shared symbolic universe. And trade did something else. It amplified the meaning of the stone. If your group had obsidian, it meant you had connections. You were part of a larger world. You had access to power, not only spiritual but social. To place obsidian in a grave was not only to arm the dead with fire, it was to declare to the living, we belong. We are linked. We are not alone. This was the beginning of something new in human history. Status embedded in objects. A body buried with a black stone from far away was not the same as one buried with a local pebble. Distance itself became a form of meaning. A rare stone brought from beyond the mountains told a story of effort, of connection, of value. In this way, the black stone carried not only spiritual weight but social weight. It became a marker of identity, hierarchy, and memory. The trade in black stones may even have been the seed of what we later call civilization. To exchange objects is to exchange trust. To accept something rare from a stranger is to enter into a relationship. Over time these relationships grew. Trails became routes. Routes became networks. Networks became the skeleton of culture. And at the heart of those early exchanges lay small gleaming fragments of darkness. Consider the paradox. Obsidian was sharp enough to cut, yet sacred enough to bury. It was both a weapon of survival and a token of transcendence. In this duality lies its power. Perhaps that is why it traveled so far. For what other object could so perfectly embody the tension between life and death, between need and belief? Other black stones moved too. Hematite, with its deep iron-red streak, was ground into pigment and traded for its use in ritual painting. Jet, fossilized wood black as night, was carved into beads and passed from hand to hand. Basalt, dark and heavy, was shaped into grinding stones and sacred pillars. Each of these carried their own aura, their own story. But obsidian remained the star, its mirror-like surface reflecting both the face of the living and the shadow of the dead. When we trace the paths of these stones, we see more than trade. We see memory moving. We see belief on the move. Each stone carried not only its volcanic origin but the imprint of all the hands that had touched it, all the graves it had entered, all the stories whispered about its fire. To think of obsidian traveling across continents is to realize that long before empires rose, long before cities were built, there already existed a global consciousness, fragile, scattered, but real. A sense that humans were part of a web larger than themselves, connected by sacred objects. And what of the graves where these stones ended their journey? To lie in the earth beside the dead was both an ending and a beginning. The stone's movement stopped, but its meaning continued. Those who buried it remembered where it had come from, remembered the effort it took to acquire, remembered the fire it contained. In this way, the black stone became both artifact and archive, recording not only the death it marked but the journey it had taken across the living world. In the trade of darkness we glimpse the first stirrings of globalization. Not the cold globalization of markets and industry, but the warm, flickering kind, built on human hands passing tokens of meaning, built on shared awe for a stone born of fire and shadow. The black stone moved across continents, and in doing so, it carried humanity with it. Power in its earliest form was not armies, or walls, or laws. It was the ability to command belief. Before chiefs held spears, they held symbols. Before kings wore crowns, they carried stones. And among the most potent of these early symbols were the black stones, obsidian, jet, basalt, objects that seemed to condense mystery into matter. We must remember, in a world without writing, power could not be recorded. It had to be performed. Authority had to be visible, embodied, enacted. To lead was to stand apart, to be marked by something that others did not possess. And what better marker than the rare, shimmering black stone, pulled from distant volcanoes, cut sharper than teeth, glowing with an uncanny darkness. The graves tell us much. Some burials are ordinary, bones laid down with nothing, or perhaps a fragment of ochre. But others stand out. A body rests with beads of jet around the neck. Another lies with an obsidian blade at the side, far sharper than any tool needed for daily life. A child, strangely, is buried with a basalt figurine, though children had no power to wield in life. Why? Perhaps because their family, their clan, their lineage wanted to mark them as special, different, elevated. Here we see the beginnings of hierarchy written in stone. Those who could command access to rare black stones could command people's attention. To bury someone with such an object was to declare them not ordinary, but significant. These burials whisper of early leaders, shamans, visionaries, those who in life had stood at the center of the circle, guiding others through ritual, decision, or dream. And the stones themselves amplified this aura. Obsidian knives were not just tools. When held in ritual, they caught the firelight, dazzling and dangerous. Jet beads, polished until they gleamed like midnight water, must have seemed to drink in the torchlight, holding within them the shadows of the cave. Basalt statues, heavy and dark, exuded permanence, as if they were not carved by human hands but born from the earth already shaped. These qualities made the black stones ideal for leaders who sought to embody more than flesh. To be a leader was to be seen as more than human, touched by forces beyond the tribe. The stone in the hand, the stone at the chest, the stone buried with the body, it was all evidence that the leader was connected to the invisible world. But leadership was fragile. Authority needed constant renewal. Every death threatened the community with uncertainty. Who would guide them now? Who would speak to the spirits, lead the hunt, decide the path? In such moments, the black stone was not only a symbol but a solution. Place it in the grave, and it became a way of transferring power, of anchoring the leader's memory into the earth. Perhaps it was believed that the stone carried a fragment of their essence. Perhaps it was thought that the living, when they touched the same kind of stone, could call upon the dead leader's guidance. This is the echo of power, the idea that objects could hold the force of a person, that authority could be crystallized into matter. Long before crowns and scepters, the black stone was the first regalia. It was the first throne, condensed into a portable form. It was power you could hold in your hand. Archaeologists debate, were these burials evidence of inequality, or were they communal? Offerings meant to honor specific roles? Was the person with the obsidian dagger truly more powerful in life, or did the community simply choose to honor them in death? The truth is likely both. For leadership in the deep past was not rigid. It shifted with seasons, with needs, with charisma. Yet through it all, the stone endured as a marker. One can imagine the scene, a shaman standing before the tribe, obsidian blade in hand, sunlight flickering off its edge. The crowd gathers, silent, awed. The blade is lifted, perhaps to the sky, perhaps over the body of the dead. Words are spoken, gestures made. In that moment, authority is not abstract. It is visible, gleaming, sharp. It is something you can see, something you can almost touch. What is remarkable is how persistent this pattern becomes. Thousands of years later, kings will still crown themselves with black stones, onyx, jet, obsidian, polished gems. Temples will be built of basalt, statues of granite, altars of jet. The connection between darkness and power, between blackness and leadership, between stone and permanence, this thread begins here, in the earliest graves, with the mysterious black rocks that set certain bodies apart from others. We might ask, why black? Why not red, or white, or gold? Perhaps because black contains a paradox. It is the color of absence and of depth, of void and of weight. To look into a polished obsidian mirror is to see not only yourself, but a distorted, otherworldly version of yourself. To wear jet beads is to adorn yourself with night itself. To hold a basalt idol is to feel the heaviness of the earth's bones. Black does not dazzle like gold, it absorbs. It does not shimmer like crystal, it endures. For early leaders, this endurance was crucial. Power is fleeting in flesh, but stone persists. In this way, the black stone was not just an accessory of leadership, it was its foundation. To lead was to wield it. To be buried with it was to prove, for all time, that one had held power in life. The stone outlasted the leader, and in so doing, it outlasted doubt. Yet the echo of power was not always gentle. Obsidian blades could cut, and perhaps they did. To sacrifice with such a blade was to merge violence with transcendence, to make death itself a performance of authority. Power, after all, is always shadowed by fear. The black stone, sharp and gleaming, carried both awe and dread. To follow a leader with such a stone was to believe in their connection to mystery, and to remember the edge waiting at your throat if you did not. Thus the black stone became the axis of early power, a shard of darkness turned into a beacon of leadership, an object of burial transformed into an emblem of rule. And its echoes still linger, in crowns, in altars, in monuments built of stone, as if humanity never quite forgot that power is strongest when it looks as if it comes from the earth itself. Among all the black stones carried into graves, none command more fascination, or more fear, than obsidian blades. Sharp as glass, sharper even than steel, they cut with a precision so fine it borders on the unreal. A modern surgeon, using obsidian scalpels, finds edges smoother than any industrial steel could offer. Imagine, then, what such a blade must have felt like 10,000 years ago, in the hands of a figure draped in ritual skins, standing before a circle of fire-lit faces. For this was no ordinary tool. The shaman's blade was never meant only to slice meat or carve wood. It belonged to another register of life altogether, the register of blood and breath, of transformation and offering. When we find these blades in graves, we do not see them worn down like working tools. They are often whole, intact, ceremonial. They were not thrown aside after use. They were carried into eternity. We must ask, what role did these blades play in the lives of the living? The answer emerges when we place ourselves in the cave, the clearing, the circle of stone. Picture the shaman, their face painted with ash, their body scarred with marks of passage. In their hand gleams an obsidian blade, black as midnight, until it catches the firelight, then suddenly alive with silver edges. Around them the tribe waits, breath held. Someone is to be cut. Not fatally, at least, not always. Many rituals across the world, both ancient and modern, employ the controlled shedding of blood, a cut across the arm, the thigh, the palm, a drop spilled onto the ground. Blood released to feed the earth, to feed the ancestors, to prove endurance. In such acts the obsidian blade became not a weapon but a key, opening the body, releasing its essence. To be cut by the shaman's blade was to be marked, purified, transformed. Yet the blade was not only for the living. Animals, too, were offered through its edge. Sacrificial cuts, precise and deliberate, gave the tribe a way to return life to the spirits, to trade death for survival. Imagine the hide of a deer opened with obsidian, the blood pooling onto leaves. The act was not only about sustenance, it was about exchange, about maintaining balance. The stone itself, born of fire and mountain, became the perfect mediator between human flesh and the hidden powers of the earth. There is something uncanny about how often obsidian is associated with passage. To cut is to open is to reveal. The blade, then, was a portal, a thin line through which one might move between worlds. Shamans, standing between the living and the dead, needed such tools. With it they could mark bodies, consecrate deaths, sanctify unions, bind wounds, and guide spirits into the afterlife. But with this power came fear. For every community, the shaman was both healer and danger. They were revered and watched, trusted and suspected. The obsidian blade embodied this paradox perfectly. It healed even as it harmed, it purified even as it scarred, it revealed even as it cut away. Those who carried such a blade bore a burden of both awe and suspicion. To live with it was to live on the edge of human and more than human. Archaeological hints confirm this double life. Some graves show shamans buried not only with blades, but with stones ground into mirrors. Imagine the pairing, a blade that cuts and a mirror that reveals. One object opens the body, the other opens the vision. Together they formed a toolkit for moving across the boundaries of reality. The mirror showed the unseen, the blade enacted it. And yet, there is a darker possibility too. For obsidian is not only a medium of healing, it is also a weapon of fearsome violence. A cut with obsidian is too sharp, too clean. Some scholars wonder if the shaman's blade was sometimes turned not against animal or initiate, but against human victims. In sacrificial rites, obsidian could open the chest, spill the blood, release the life of a chosen one to the ancestors. Later civilizations, the Olmec, Maya, Aztec, would perfect such rites, using obsidian knives to pierce hearts and throats. Is it possible that the earliest shamans were already walking this path, learning to speak to the gods through the blood of humans? We may never know, but the possibility lingers, sharp as the edge itself. And in that possibility, we see how thin the line was between connection and terror, between ritual and killing. The shaman's blade was never neutral. It always carried weight, always demanded respect, always glimmered with the ambiguity of life and death. To hold such a blade was to hold authority. To wield it was to step into the role of guide, mediator, channel. Each ritual cut stitched the community to the unseen. Each scar carried on the skin reminded the tribe of their place in the cosmos. Each drop of blood marked a transaction with forces larger than themselves. The stone was black, but what it opened was red. And so the grave tells us its silent story. The obsidian knife buried with the shaman is not just a tool left behind. It is a testimony of power, a relic of fear, a promise of continuity. Those who buried it did not simply discard it. They gave it back to the earth, believing perhaps that the blade belonged not to one person, but to the endless cycle of death and rebirth. If the black stone was the foundation of leadership, then the blade was the cutting edge of belief. It was not enough to speak of spirits. You had to touch them, feel them, bleed with them. The shaman's blade made this possible, turning the invisible into the tangible, the mystical into the physical. And in that act of cutting, humanity itself was changed. Even now, thousands of years later, obsidian carries this aura. Modern ritualists and spiritual seekers still use obsidian knives, not to kill, but to symbolically cut away attachments, negativity, illusions. The act of cutting remains a metaphor for separation and transformation. The stone still holds the same paradox: danger and protection, destruction and healing, death and renewal. To gaze upon one of these ancient blades in a museum case is to feel a tremor. You see not only a shard of rock, but the memory of trembling hands, of chanting voices, of blood dripping onto soil. You see humanity at the threshold, desperate to connect, willing to suffer, willing to sacrifice. You see the shaman standing at the center of the circle, blade raised, obsidian edge catching the firelight. And you understand, if only for a moment, why the people believed. If the obsidian blade was the instrument of blood, the obsidian mirror was the instrument of sight. Polished until it gleamed with an impossible darkness, the stone became something more than matter. It became a surface through which the human mind wandered into hidden realms. A mirror does not merely reflect, it invites. And when the mirror is black, it invites us into depths without end. Across the world the story repeats itself. In Mesoamerica, shamans carried obsidian mirrors, circular discs polished to a fine sheen. In their surface, they claimed, one could see gods, ancestors, and visions of the future. Centuries later, in Elizabethan England, the alchemist John Dee used a similar obsidian mirror, a relic of the Aztec world, to summon angels and seek hidden wisdom. Even today, in esoteric practices, black mirrors are said to serve as portals, not to show our face, but to show what lies beyond the face. The idea is both simple and profound. A mirror is an emptiness that returns an image. But in the black stone, the image is incomplete. Stare long enough into a polished disc of obsidian and your reflection begins to fade. Your features blur, dissolve into shadow. You do not see yourself, you see something other. For ancient peoples this was no illusion of optics. It was a revelation. The stone was speaking back, showing not the surface of things but the hidden reality beneath. Imagine a cave at night. Torches flicker, smoke curls in the air. At the center, the shaman sits with a polished black stone upon their lap. Around them the tribe waits in silence, breath caught. The shaman lowers their face to the mirror. The firelight glances across its surface, but most of the stone remains opaque, impenetrable. Then the chanting begins, low, steady, rhythmic. The shaman gazes deeper, deeper, until the stone swallows their eyes. What do they see? We cannot know. Perhaps ancestors long gone. Perhaps spirits clothed in animal form. Perhaps visions of coming famine or coming triumph. The mirror was not a passive object. It was a tool for the imagination, yes, but also, for those who believed, a literal doorway. To look into the black stone was to pierce the veil. Why black? Why darkness instead of clear reflection? Here we enter philosophy. To stare into darkness is to confront the unknown, to face the limits of perception. Clear water shows the face, black stone swallows it. And yet, in being swallowed, one is freed from the self, from the ordinary world, from the confinement of daily sight. The black mirror gives back not the obvious but the hidden. It replaces clarity with mystery, and in mystery the sacred is born. Archaeologists uncover these mirrors in graves, often alongside other ritual objects. They are not buried as vanity pieces, not tools of grooming or decoration. They are sacred items carried into the afterlife. Just as the shaman's blade could cut the soul free, the mirror could guide it, showing the path to the other world. In death as in life, the stone revealed what ordinary eyes could not. We might pause here, reflecting ourselves. Think of the last time you stared into darkness, into a pool of still water at night, into a window when the room was unlit, into the pupil of an eye. Did you not feel a faint unease? That sense that something stares back. The ancients magnified this unease into ritual, formalizing it, trusting it. For them, the black rock was not empty, it was alive with presence. But like the blade, the mirror too carried a double edge. To see too much was dangerous. Visions could heal, but they could also terrify. A glimpse of death before it came, a prophecy of famine, a face of a spirit with too much power. Such sights could shake a tribe to its bones. Not all who looked into the mirror returned whole. The shaman carried the risk on behalf of their people, bearing the burden of vision. Even today the idea lingers. Scrying, the act of gazing into a dark surface to seek images, survives in occult practice. The obsidian mirror, whether ancient or modern, remains charged with this uncanny possibility. It is not only an archaeological artifact, but a living symbol of humanity's oldest hunger, to know what lies beyond the limits of sight. The grave goods tell us a final detail. Mirrors were often placed near the head of the deceased. A guide for the soul, perhaps, or a window through which the dead could still look back. Imagine lying in the earth, darkness surrounding you, and in your hand a polished disk of eternal night. The living place it there not as ornament but as compass. May the spirit find its way through the void, guided by the stone that reflects not light but eternity. The obsidian mirror reminds us that human beings have always sought more than survival. Food and fire keep the body alive, vision keeps the spirit alive. To dream, to imagine, to reach beyond the seen, that is as vital to humanity as hunting or shelter. The black stone, polished into a mirror, embodies this hunger. It is the proof that prehistoric life was not only struggle but wonder, not only fear but curiosity. And so when we encounter these mirrors in museums, lying mute behind glass, we must remember that they were once alive, with breath and chanting, with visions and awe. They were not curiosities. They were instruments of passage. In their depths generations of human beings found courage, guidance, terror, and hope. They gazed into night and believed they saw the dawn. The mirror of night, the black rock polished into reflection, remains one of humanity's strangest creations. It is not practical. It is not efficient. It is unnecessary for survival in the narrow sense. And yet it endured, for millennia, across continents, cultures, and ages. Why? Because survival is not enough. We need meaning. We need vision. We need to believe that in the darkness, something awaits. The obsidian mirror, then, is not just a relic. It is a reminder that to be human is to stand before darkness, and dare to look. Not all graves are equal. Some are shallow pits, hurriedly filled, others are monumental mounds built with backbreaking devotion. In both, we often find obsidian, but in the burials of leaders, the black stone speaks louder, shines brighter, holds heavier meaning. It was not only the shaman who wielded this material. The chieftain, the war leader, the matriarch of a clan, these figures carried obsidian into their graves like banners that continued fluttering long after the body was dust. Archaeologists tell us something striking. In many prehistoric societies, the grave goods of a leader are not merely more numerous, they are qualitatively different. Where the ordinary hunter may be buried with a simple blade, the chieftain lies with a cache of mirrors, weapons, and carved ornaments, each of obsidian, each radiating authority. The stone becomes a language of power, a grammar of command. If the shaman's mirror opened a portal, the chief's blade asserted dominance. Together they formed two poles of early civilization, vision and power, mystery and might. Picture a great burial mound on the horizon. Stones are heaped, soil raised, and the community labors for days, perhaps weeks, to honor their fallen leader. At the mound's heart lies the body, dressed in furs, surrounded by tokens of status. Among these, gleaming in the dim light, are the black stones. Their edges sharp, their surfaces reflective, their presence undeniable. The living know these are not mere objects. They are symbols of why this person led, why their voice was obeyed, why their memory must endure. Why obsidian? The answer again is scarcity and beauty. The chieftain's grave did not contain common flint or ordinary pebbles. It held what was rare, costly, difficult to obtain. Perhaps the obsidian was carried from a distant volcanic region, traded across valleys and rivers, passed hand to hand until it reached the tribe. To bury such material with a leader was a statement. This person was worth the expense, worth the sacrifice, worth the distance. Their status is measured in miles traveled and risks endured. But beyond economy there is something subtler. Obsidian carries a majesty that flint does not. It is dark, lustrous, dangerous. Its presence is magnetic even today in a way that few stones can rival. Place a chunk of it in your palm and you feel its weight, its chill, its gleam. It looks as though it belongs to another world. What better emblem for leadership? To command is to be set apart, to seem touched by forces beyond the ordinary. The black rock made that visible. Consider also the funerary role. In burying their chieftain with obsidian, the tribe made a public declaration: this leader does not vanish. They pass beyond, still armed, still honored, still adorned. The stone was continuity. Just as the mirror guided the soul, the blade defended it, and the ornament proclaimed it. For the living, these burials served as lessons. Children saw the stones glittering beside the skeletal frame and learned: authority is sacred, leadership is bound to mystery, the black stone belongs to those who rule. There is evidence that obsidian marked not only individuals but dynasties. Graves arranged in clusters show repeated deposits of black stones across generations of leaders, as though each burial reaffirmed a contract. The community was not simply honoring one leader, they were honoring the institution of leadership itself. Each stone was both tribute and anchor, binding the past to the present. It is tempting to see these burials as mere vanity projects of the powerful. But they were more than that. In societies without writing, without monuments of stone or metal, grave goods were memory itself. They were history in material form. A leader buried with obsidian left behind not words but symbols. When descendants opened the mound or told its story, the black rock became evidence. Here was a person of consequence, here was one who shaped us, here is why we remember. And yet the story is not simple. Leadership itself was fragile. To bury obsidian was also to bury wealth, to remove valuable resources from circulation. Why waste such stones? Why entomb them where no living hand could use them? The answer lies in sacrifice. By giving up the obsidian, the community proved its devotion, binding itself to the memory of the leader. It was a cost willingly paid, a declaration that the leader's worth exceeded practical needs. Obsidian in a grave was a pledge of loyalty carved in stone. But there is a shadow side too. To equip the dead with black stones may also have been a way of protecting the living from the dead themselves. Leaders held power, and power does not simply evaporate. It lingers, dangerous, unsettled. By arming the chief with obsidian, perhaps the tribe was also appeasing them, ensuring their ghost would not rise in anger, would not haunt the village with demands unmet. The black stone was both honor and insurance. We see echoes of this logic across time. Pharaohs buried with gold and weapons, Viking chieftains with swords and ships, medieval kings with crowns, all speak the same language: power survives death. The black rock is one of the earliest dialects of that language. It shows us that already, tens of thousands of years ago, humanity was grappling with the strange problem of authority, how to preserve it, how to honor it, how to guard against it. And so the graves of power whisper across the millennia. The shimmering obsidian at a chieftain's side tells us that leadership was never only about force. It was about presence, charisma, ritual, and the aura of the sacred. The stone carried all of this, concentrating it in a form that could survive long after flesh decayed. Today, when archaeologists lift these stones from the earth, they hold not only objects but echoes of command. In their glassy depth still lingers the weight of voices that once commanded obedience, of hands that held sway, of lives that carried the burden of decision. These black rocks are fossils of authority as much as they are artifacts of geology. In the end, the burial of power with obsidian reminds us that leadership is always both real and imagined. It is grounded in practical needs, hunting skill, strategic mind, strength of arm, but it is sustained by symbols, by stories, by objects that embody meaning. The black rock was one such object, and in its gleam prehistoric societies found a way to make leadership endure beyond the grave. There are moments in human prehistory where the black stone seems to take on a thirst. Not content to lie as ornament or serve only as symbol, it becomes a tool of bloodletting, an edge honed sharper than any steel, a blade that parts flesh as though the world itself required sacrifice. In these moments, obsidian is no longer merely the stone of graves but the instrument by which life itself was offered to unseen powers. Archaeologists have uncovered strange sites where bones lie scattered not in burial, but in sacrifice. Beside them rest shards of obsidian, thin, curved, deadly sharp. Unlike flint, obsidian can be knapped to an edge so fine it rivals the sharpest surgical scalpels of today. One strike, one cut, and skin parts effortlessly. For ancient peoples this property was not only practical, it was mystical. The black stone seemed destined for rituals of blood. Imagine a ritual in a darkened cave. A circle of figures chanting, the flicker of firelight dancing on walls painted with ochre. At the center, an animal bound, or perhaps a human chosen for offering. In the shaman's hand gleams a blade of obsidian. With a whisper, the blade descends. Its edge, invisible in the dimness, bites deep. Blood spills, dark on dark, absorbed by earth. And in that moment, those watching believe they have touched the invisible, appeased the forces that govern rain, harvest, and death. The use of obsidian for ritual sacrifice is not conjecture alone. In later Mesoamerican civilizations, where obsidian was abundant, it became the quintessential sacrificial blade. Aztec priests wielded obsidian knives to open chests and lift beating hearts to the sky. Though these rituals are separated from Paleolithic burials by millennia, the continuity suggests an ancient origin. The black stone's sharpness and mystery made it the natural mediator between human life and divine demand. But why sacrifice at all? To modern minds the act seems horrific, senseless. Yet to early societies it was a profound exchange. Life was not taken lightly. It was offered. Blood was believed to carry essence, vitality, power. To spill it with the black stone was to give the gods or spirits a portion of one's own being. The obsidian blade became the bridge, its darkness mirrored the abyss, its brilliance mirrored the stars. To cut with it was to pierce the veil. There is also the notion of balance. Prehistoric peoples lived in fragile harmony with their environment. A failed hunt, a dry season, a harsh winter could spell death for many. In this precarious existence, sacrifice was seen as negotiation. By offering the blood of one, the survival of many might be secured. The black stone's cut was not cruelty, it was bargaining, pleading, the desperate attempt to hold chaos at bay. Obsidian's role in this is telling. Ordinary knives could kill, but the obsidian blade killed with precision, elegance, inevitability. It was too sharp, too otherworldly not to be chosen for acts that touched on the sacred. To hold such a blade was to feel destiny in one's hand. Many archaeologists believe shamans kept these blades not as tools but as relics, each one imbued with the memory of a sacrifice, each edge carrying the residue of blood offered to powers unseen. There is also something haunting about obsidian's reflective surface. After the cut, after the ritual, when the blade was cleaned, the shaman might hold it up and see his own face staring back. To look into such a blade was to confront oneself, to know that the same stone that took another's life could take your own. This duality, mirror and knife, reflection and death, made obsidian a paradox that preoccupied the prehistoric mind. And what of the victims? For some, perhaps animals, the offering was practical as much as sacred, a goat, a deer, a bird. But in certain contexts, bones suggest something darker. Human sacrifice. Here obsidian's edge took lives not to feed mouths but to feed gods. Were these acts voluntary, chosen by the victim as honor? Or were they coerced, demanded by leaders and shamans alike? We may never know. But the black rock was the silent witness, the tool that rendered intention irreversible. The burial record hints at this too. Some graves contain not only the honored dead adorned with obsidian, but also secondary burials, individuals without adornment, hurriedly interred nearby. Were these retainers sacrificed to follow the chief into the afterlife, or enemies killed to empower the burial? In either case, the obsidian blade was the hand that carried them across. The black rock did not only accompany the dead, it created the dead. It is worth reflecting on the emotional weight of such rituals. For those who watched, the obsidian blade must have shimmered with unbearable gravity. Each cut was a reminder of mortality, of power, of the thin veil between life and death. To witness sacrifice was to feel awe, terror, and perhaps reassurance that the community had done what was required to ensure survival. The black rock was not simply a weapon, it was the sacred edge of necessity. Even today, when we hold an obsidian blade in a museum or laboratory, we can feel a trace of that weight. Its sharpness is undeniable, almost frightening. Scientists who handle obsidian scalpels speak of the uncanny sensation of cutting flesh with something so precise, so smooth, that the body barely resists. If we feel this awe in sterile conditions, how much more must our ancestors have felt it under firelight, with chants echoing and gods invoked? And so obsidian emerges in this chapter as the stone of sacrifice. In graves it was remembrance, in mirrors it was vision, but in blades it was offering. The black rock demanded and received blood, shaping rituals that bound humans to forces they could neither see nor control. It is a chilling role, yet also a profoundly human one. For in sacrifice we glimpse not cruelty, but the desperate attempt to communicate with the cosmos, to make meaning of suffering, to exchange pain for hope. The mysterious black rock, therefore, was not only the stone of the dead, it was the stone that made the dead. It was chosen for its edge, its beauty, its aura of otherness. And in every cut it left behind a message, that life is fragile, that the sacred demands cost, and that the line between this world and the next can be crossed only in blood, with a blade black as night. The story of the black rock is not confined to caves, graves, and rituals. It stretches outward across mountains, valleys, and seas, tracing invisible lines of connection that bound early human communities together. For obsidian was never merely a local stone, it was the first global commodity of the prehistoric world. It traveled in hands, in pouches, in baskets, traded like treasure across landscapes vast and unforgiving. It was a substance so rare, so vital, that it stitched together the scattered tribes of humanity into the beginnings of civilization itself. The strange fact about obsidian is that it is born in very few places. Unlike flint or other common stones, obsidian forms only near volcanic flows, in specific geological circumstances where lava cools too quickly to crystallize. The result is glass, rare, gleaming, black as night. This rarity meant that for most groups obsidian could not be gathered locally. To obtain it, one had to journey, one had to trade, and so networks grew, routes carved into memory, paths worn by countless feet, trails where obsidian passed from one hand to the next like a talisman of power. Archaeological evidence reveals this extraordinary journey. At Catalhoyuk, one of the world's earliest proto-cities in Anatolia, archaeologists have found obsidian tools in abundance, yet the nearest sources lie hundreds of kilometers away, deep in volcanic landscapes. This means the stone was carried across long distances, exchanged through intricate webs of trade that reached settlements far beyond the horizon. In fact, some researchers believe obsidian was one of the primary forces that bound Catalhoyuk into prominence. It was not simply a settlement, it was a hub, a marketplace where the dark stone flowed like lifeblood. And this pattern repeats across the globe. In the Americas, obsidian from the highlands of Mexico appears in coastal communities far removed from volcanoes. In Europe, obsidian from the Mediterranean islands of Melos and Lipari was transported to mainland settlements. In the Near East, the volcanic peaks of Cappadocia and Armenia supplied obsidian that spread across early Mesopotamian villages. Every region where the stone was found became a beacon, a source of light, or perhaps shadow, drawing traders, travelers, and pilgrims. The very nature of obsidian shaped these networks. Its sharpness made it invaluable for survival, but its appearance made it desirable beyond necessity. It was a tool and a jewel, a weapon and an amulet. Those who held it were seen as wealthy, powerful, touched by distant lands. The black stone carried stories with it, of mountains where fire once flowed, of dangerous journeys undertaken, of alliances forged between tribes who might otherwise have been enemies. In many ways, obsidian was the first form of prehistoric currency. It was portable, divisible, and universally valued. A blade could be chipped into smaller pieces, each still sharp, each still meaningful. In some sites, archaeologists find caches of obsidian nodules hidden in pits, as though stored for future trade, like treasure buried against uncertainty. To hold such a cache was to hold influence, to control not only one's immediate group but also the flow of power between groups. Yet obsidian trade was not simply economic. It carried with it the intangible weight of myth. Each fragment, gleaming black, seemed to hold something of the volcano's fire, something dangerous, something alive. To carry obsidian was to carry a piece of the earth's fury, cooled and tamed but never entirely safe. Traders must have told stories as they handed it over, of mountains that smoked, of gods who hurled fire, of stones birthed in chaos. The trade in shadows was also a trade in imagination, in the myths that bound human communities through shared awe. Consider the journey itself. A trader leaves his volcanic homeland carrying a pouch heavy with nodules of obsidian. He crosses forests, rivers, plains, moving from one group to another. At each stop, he offers a piece, perhaps in exchange for food, hides, shells, or amber. Each fragment he gives away extends the stone's influence, placing it in the hands of another community who will marvel at it, use it, bury it. By the time he returns, the stone has spread outward in ripples, like ink seeping into parchment, staining entire regions with its dark presence. In this way, Obsidian connected people who never saw each other. A community hundreds of kilometers from a volcano might bury their dead with obsidian blades, never knowing the mountains that birthed them, never seeing the fiery eruptions that created their glass. To them, the stone must have seemed like magic, appearing from nowhere, carried from beyond the world they knew. Its mystery was as much in its origin as in its use. The trade also shaped hierarchies. Those who controlled access to obsidian became leaders, chiefs, or priests. They alone could decide who received the black stone and who went without. In some cases, obsidian may have been restricted to the elite, forbidden to commoners, reserved for ritual or burial. Control of the trade routes meant control of society itself. And so the black stone, sharp and silent, carved not only flesh but also power. Even in modern times, scientists can trace these ancient routes. Each volcanic source produces obsidian with a unique chemical fingerprint. By analyzing trace elements, researchers can match artifacts to their origins, reconstructing the paths they took thousands of years ago. The picture that emerges is astonishing: webs of trade stretching hundreds, sometimes thousands, of kilometers. It is as though the entire prehistoric world was already interconnected, woven together by lines of black glass. The image is poetic, obsidian as the dark thread in humanity's first tapestry of trade. Where amber glowed with golden warmth, where shells shimmered with ocean hues, obsidian was the night stone, the shadow, the reminder that even beauty can cut. It traveled not only in markets but also in myths, shaping the way people understood distance, exchange, and the possibility of connection. In the end, the trade in shadows was about more than stone. It was about the first steps toward civilization, the first recognition that survival depended not only on one's own land but on the invisible bonds woven with strangers. Obsidian was the carrier of those bonds. Its journeys across continents whispered the same truth then as now, that humanity has always lived in networks, that value has always traveled, and that the mysterious black rock was one of the first things to teach us that lesson. And so the story widens. From grave to ritual, from knife to mirror, the black stone now becomes a traveler, a merchant, a thread that weaves together worlds. Its path is long, its reach vast, its influence immeasurable. It is not only the stone of the dead, it is the stone of connection, of exchange, of humanity's first attempts to bind the earth into something greater than the sum of its parts. Trade carried the black stone across valleys and seas. But in the hands of rulers, chiefs, and priests, it transformed into something else, an emblem of authority, a sign of divine favor, a weapon not only against flesh but against doubt. Obsidian, with its gleam like night, became the stone of kings. It was no longer merely sharp or rare, it was sacred, political, a jewel of shadows that crowned the powerful. From the earliest villages to the empires that rose later, rulers sought ways to distinguish themselves from common people. They wore feathers, gold, shells, and the skins of rare animals, but obsidian carried a different weight. It was not only beautiful, it was dangerous. To hold it was to hold death, to master the edge that cut deeper than bone. In this sense, obsidian was power incarnate. Whoever controlled it appeared not merely wealthy, but chosen, set apart by the gods who birthed fire and stone. In Mesoamerica this was especially clear. The rulers of Teotihuacan, and later the Aztecs, wielded obsidian as both weapon and ornament. They wore pendants of the black glass, set blades into ceremonial knives, and even worked it into royal regalia. The macuahuitl, a wooden sword embedded with obsidian blades, was a symbol of authority as much as a tool of war. To strike with it was to wield both human strength and volcanic fury. Warriors who carried such weapons stood as extensions of their kings. The king himself stood as an extension of the earth's burning heart. The prestige of obsidian lay not only in its use but in its scarcity. Commoners might see fragments, tools, or flakes, but the largest, most polished pieces were reserved for elites. Obsidian mirrors, so black and reflective they seemed like portals, were treasures of kings and priests. They did not belong to the marketplace, they belonged to thrones and temples. To gaze into such a mirror was to gaze into the authority of the ruler himself, who claimed to see not only his own face but also the gods. This idea of exclusivity gave obsidian a dual nature. It was both common and rare, both tool and treasure. A farmer might carry an obsidian knife to cut reeds, but only a king might wear a polished disc around his neck as a sign of divine sanction. The stone thus became a ladder of prestige, climbing from survival to sovereignty. Even burial practices reveal this hierarchy. While ordinary graves sometimes contain flakes or small blades, the tombs of elites hold caches of carefully worked obsidian daggers with symmetrical edges, mirrors carved to perfection, ornaments gleaming with dark brilliance. In these tombs, obsidian was not merely utility, it was identity, proof that the buried individual had walked among shadows and returned crowned in their mystery. In some cultures, obsidian became so bound to authority that it was inseparable from kingship itself. In central Mexico, rulers were often described as lords of obsidian, their reign symbolized by the stone's sharp edge. To rule was to cut, to divide, to hold the power of life and death. Obsidian thus mirrored politics. It was both beautiful and merciless, both fragile and unyielding. A king who lost control of his blades might fall just as obsidian shatters under pressure. And yet obsidian's fragility was part of its prestige. Gold could be melted and reshaped, but obsidian once broken could not be restored. Its perfection was fleeting, its beauty dangerous, its presence always near collapse. In this way it reflected the nature of power itself. Kings ruled by edge and fear, by alliances and ceremonies, but their reigns too could shatter in an instant. Obsidian was both crown and warning. The symbolic power of obsidian extended beyond rulers into priests, who wielded it in ritual as an extension of sacred authority. The knife that sacrificed captives was often made of obsidian, its edge sharper than steel, its surface gleaming in temple fires. But the act was not only practical, it was symbolic. To cut flesh with obsidian was to cut with the hand of the gods. The priest became a vessel, the stone became divine law, and the sacrifice became renewal. Power was written in blood, inscribed by the black stone itself. In this way, kings and priests shared the prestige of obsidian, each reinforcing the other. The ruler claimed divine right, the priest enacted divine law. And between them stood the stone, a mediator of shadow. To question the king was to question the gods who gave him obsidian. To resist the priest was to resist the blade that cut at the boundary of life and death. Authority and obsidian were bound together in a circle as sharp as the stone's edge. Outside of ritual and politics, obsidian's prestige also fueled myths. Some cultures believed it was the very bones of deities, shattered and buried in volcanic earth. Others believed it was a gift stolen from the underworld, a token of death given to the living. To wear obsidian was to carry the strength of gods, or their wrath. For a king to claim it was to declare himself the chosen heir of that divine fire. Even today, when we uncover obsidian artifacts in royal tombs, their power still radiates. A polished mirror thousands of years old still gleams with uncanny clarity. A blade still cuts with deadly precision. The objects remain silent, but they whisper of authority, of men and women who once ruled, once sacrificed, once believed themselves eternal. Through the black stone their power lingers, not as memory, but as presence. Thus obsidian was never only a stone. It was a crown, a weapon, a mirror, a sign. It turned ordinary leaders into kings, ordinary knives into divine instruments, ordinary stones into relics. To call it the Stone of Kings is no exaggeration. It is to recognize that for thousands of years, the authority of entire civilizations was sharpened, reflected, and sanctified by the gleam of volcanic glass. And yet, as with kingship itself, its brilliance was temporary. The same stone that crowned rulers also outlived them. The same mirror that showed their faces now reflects only the void. Obsidian reminds us that power, no matter how sharp, no matter how divine, is always fragile. But while rulers fall, the stone endures, carrying their shadows across centuries. Prestige gave obsidian to kings. Ritual gave it to priests. But war gave it to everyone. On the battlefield the black stone was not only sacred or symbolic, it was lethal. Obsidian became blades, daggers, arrowheads, and great swords that shattered enemies and reshaped empires. If it crowned rulers, it also armed their soldiers, sending the gleam of volcanic fire into the clash of armies. The most famous weapon was the macuahuitl, a wooden sword edged with obsidian blades set like teeth. To hold it was to wield a paradox, wood and glass, fragile and unstoppable, sacred and brutal. The macuahuitl could slice with terrifying sharpness. Spanish conquistadors reported seeing horses cut open in single strokes. Yet it could also shatter, splintering into fragments that left wounds impossible to heal. In battle it was as much terror as weapon, for every slash was both a strike and a reminder of the stone's unearthly edge. But obsidian weaponry was not limited to one culture. Across the world, wherever volcanic glass appeared, people transformed it into tools of war. In Anatolia, obsidian arrowheads pierced Bronze Age armor. In the Pacific Islands, it tipped spears that flashed in the sun. In the Americas, it filled quivers and wore clubs. Soldiers marched not with dull stone, but with black fire in their hands. The battlefield was not only blood and dust, it was a storm of glittering shards, each arrow singing of volcanic birth. The power of obsidian in war came from its edge. Unlike metal, which dulled, obsidian fractured into new sharpness. Each strike renewed its cutting power. Each flake was sharper than a surgeon's scalpel, sharper even than steel. This meant wounds were devastating, deep, and jagged. Soldiers struck by obsidian carried not just pain but infection. A single cut might mean a slow death long after the battle. War with obsidian was war that lingered, war that haunted. And yet, just as on the throne, obsidian's fragility mattered too. A blade could break in mid-strike, leaving a warrior vulnerable. A shattered macuaweedle became a club without teeth. A broken arrowhead could not be recovered. This fragility demanded skill, strategy, and reverence. To wield obsidian was to balance perfection and collapse, to fight knowing your weapon might betray you as suddenly as power itself. In this way, obsidian made war not just violent, but philosophical. The stone reminded every warrior of mortality, even as they held it to end another's. The Aztecs, perhaps more than any other people, mastered the art of obsidian warfare. Their armies marched with weapons glinting like liquid night, their warriors trained to capture rather than kill. The sharpness of obsidian made it possible to wound and disable without instantly killing, allowing soldiers to bring captives back for sacrifice. Thus the battlefield fed the temple, and the temple fed the battlefield. War and ritual were bound together by the edge of obsidian. Accounts from the Spanish conquerors, though filtered through their own astonishment, describe obsidian weapons with awe and fear. They wrote of swords that could decapitate men, of arrows that pierced armor, of warriors armed with blades that gleamed in the sun like mirrors of death. Even hardened soldiers, used to steel and cannon, trembled before the uncanny sharpness of a stone weapon. They recognized in obsidian something older and stranger than their own warcraft. But beyond its brutality, obsidian carried wonder. To fight with such weapons was also to fight with mystery. Every blade was a fragment of volcanic memory, every sword a piece of the earth's fiery heart. For the warrior, obsidian was not only tool but companion, a shard of creation itself turned toward destruction. To strike with it was to borrow the violence of the earth, to become an extension of fire and shadow. In this sense, obsidian made every battle cosmic, every wound a reminder of forces greater than men. Even in peacetime the weapons remained sacred. Warriors stored their macuaweedle not as mere arms, but as relics, cared for with ritual, honored as living extensions of themselves. To break one was a kind of death, to wield one in victory was a kind of rebirth. Families sometimes buried fallen soldiers with their obsidian blades, ensuring that in the afterlife they would still walk armed, still carry the fire of the earth into eternity. The duality of obsidian, fragile yet deadly, divine yet earthly, was written into every clash. A soldier charging with an obsidian spear might feel invincible, but he also knew the weapon could shatter. The battlefield became a theater of paradox, where brilliance and ruin mingled. Some warriors believed the stone chose its strikes, that a blade that shattered had already completed its purpose. Whether true or not, the belief gave war a mystical aura, where chance and destiny cut as deeply as steel. And so, obsidian as weapon carried both fear and beauty. Its wonder lay not only in how it killed, but in how it revealed. In every glint of a black edge, soldiers saw the memory of fire, the trembling of the earth, the mystery of death. The weapon was not separate from the cosmos, it was part of it, a shard of the volcanic underworld turned outward. War became ritual, ritual became war, and obsidian was the bridge between them. Today in museums we see these weapons displayed under glass. The macuaweedle sits silent, its teeth of obsidian still sharp, its wood long since hardened with age. We imagine the sound of it striking armor, the gleam of it in the sun, the cry of soldiers in battle. Even now, centuries later, it does not seem like an artifact. It seems alive, as though waiting to be lifted again. The black stone still whispers of war, of wonder, of empires risen and fallen on its edge. Thus obsidian was not merely a tool of kings, not merely a symbol of ritual. It was also a blade of war, a weapon of wonder. It cut horses, men, and time itself. It turned the battlefield into a mirror of the volcano, where fire and shadow danced in human hands. To hold it was to hold the violence of the earth, sharpened to perfection, fragile yet eternal. And so obsidian remains in memory not only as stone, but as war's most mysterious companion. Obsidian is not only a weapon or a crown, not only an offering or a blade. It is also a mirror. When polished to perfection, the black stone transforms from tool to portal. Staring into it is not like looking into glass, where reflections are clear and immediate. Instead, one looks into a depth without end. The surface seems solid, yet it swallows the gaze. It is not a reflection but an invitation. Archaeologists have found obsidian mirrors in temples, tombs, and sacred spaces across the ancient world. They are perfectly polished, oval or round, smooth enough to capture light yet deep enough to absorb it. At first they appear as objects of luxury, but their placement reveals their true purpose. They were not simply for grooming or vanity. They were instruments of vision, of communication, of crossing thresholds between worlds. The Aztecs revered the obsidian mirror above all as a divine tool. It was the instrument of Tezcatlipoca, the smoking mirror, the god of night, sorcery, and destiny. He was often depicted with one eye replaced by a shining black disk, a mirror that could see all things, past, present, and future. To carry an obsidian mirror was to carry the eye of the god himself, to walk with his vision, to see with his shadow. Here the stone was not just mineral, it was divine perception. Priests and shamans used these mirrors in rituals of prophecy. In the smoke of incense, they gazed into the blackness, seeking visions. Some claimed they could see the faces of ancestors, others that they could glimpse events not yet born. For the community, the mirror was not an object but a doorway. To peer into its depths was to brush against fate, to risk being seen as much as seeing. The mirror did not only reveal, it also watched back. In Europe centuries later, obsidian mirrors appeared in the hands of sorcerers and mystics. The most famous belonged to John Dee, astrologer and advisor to Queen Elizabeth I. His mirror, brought from the New World, became a tool for scrying, divination by vision. Dee claimed to use it to converse with angels, to peer into heavenly realms, to receive messages that transcended the mortal world. Even in the heart of Renaissance England, the volcanic stone carried its aura of mystery, linking the fires of Mexico to the courts of Europe. To gaze into an obsidian mirror is to confront paradox. The surface is black, opaque, and yet it reflects. One sees one's own face, but altered, as though the features belong to someone else. The light bends strangely, shadows deepen, edges blur. The mirror becomes a threshold where identity fractures, where the self appears as both familiar and alien. This uncanny effect is part of its power. It unsettles. It shifts perception. It opens the mind to what lies beyond ordinary sight. For those who believed, the mirror was more than a tool of vision, it was a map of the cosmos. The surface was the night sky, infinite and consuming. The reflections that shimmered were the stars, fleeting and bright. To place an obsidian mirror in a ritual was to bring the universe into the temple, to create a miniature cosmos in the palm of a hand. Through it the divine could be approached, the dead could be invoked, the unseen could be given form. But just as obsidian weapons carried fragility, so too did obsidian mirrors carry danger. To look too long, to see too much, was to risk madness. The mirror might show not only what was sought but also what was feared. It could reveal shadows one did not wish to meet, truths one was not ready to hold. In some traditions, obsidian mirrors were covered when not in use, veiled as though sleeping. The belief was that even idle they could attract spirits, that they could open doors without permission. The mirror's role in ritual also connected back to burial. Just as black stones were placed in graves to guide the dead, mirrors could be placed in tombs to serve as windows between worlds. For the living, the mirror brought visions of the beyond. For the dead, it was a lantern in the darkness, a reminder of the sun's return, a shard of volcanic fire to light the way. Its surface was both night and dawn, both loss and renewal. Even today, obsidian mirrors fascinate. Museums display them behind glass, yet their surfaces remain alive. Visitors lean close, and for a moment they see their faces staring back, dim, altered. The gaze lingers. The blackness seems endless. People report feeling watched, as though the mirror still carries its old power. The modern world may dismiss such things as superstition, but the sensation remains undeniable. Something about the stone resists reduction. It is more than geology. It is more than artifact. It is presence. Philosophically, the obsidian mirror asks a question: what is a reflection? When one looks into glass, one expects to see oneself intact and whole. When one looks into obsidian, one sees shadow, distortion, depth. The reflection is incomplete, fractured, ambiguous. It is not identity but possibility. In this sense, the mirror is not a tool of vanity but of philosophy. It teaches that the self is not fixed but fluid, not surface but depth. It suggests that identity is as volcanic as the stone itself, born of fire, fractured by pressure, polished by time, forever unstable. For ancient peoples, this philosophical truth was not abstract. It was lived. The obsidian mirror reminded them that the world was both visible and invisible, that life was both certain and fragile, that death was both an ending and a passage. To look into the mirror was to confront these truths directly, to feel them in the eyes, to carry them into the soul. Thus obsidian's role as mirror completes its story. From grave to crown, from blade to portal, the black stone carried meaning beyond itself. As mirror, it became the most intimate of all forms, the place where human beings met themselves and found both recognition and mystery. In its darkness they saw not only their own face, but the vastness of time, the nearness of death, the possibility of the divine. The obsidian mirror remains, then, not just a tool of sorcery, not just an artifact of ritual, but a portal, one that still waits. It is a fragment of the earth polished into eternity, holding within its black depths both the memory of fire and the whisper of the unknown. To stand before it is to feel the presence of something older than history, something that does not simply reflect, but reveals. Obsidian has traveled with humanity since the beginning. From the first moment a hand reached into the volcanic earth and pulled forth a shard of glass, sharp and black, the stone entered the human story. It cut flesh and wood, it traced paths of survival, it shaped the earliest tools. It was fire solidified, darkness given form, earth turned to blade. From that moment, it never left. The endurance of obsidian is not measured in years but in meanings. Across continents and millennia, the same black stone carried different yet connected roles. In one place it was a weapon of war, in another it was a crown of kings, in yet another it was a mirror of gods. The form changed, the use shifted, but the essence remained. The stone was always more than itself. It was always both material and symbol, both tool and myth, both matter and metaphor. Why did it endure? Why did one volcanic glass hold such sway long after metal rose, long after steel replaced its edge, long after the practical need for it had passed? The answer lies not in its function, but in its form. Obsidian is unique. It is light, it is shadow, it is fire frozen. It gleams, it cuts, it reflects, it consumes. No other stone looks like it, no other stone feels like it. To hold it is to hold paradox, fragility and sharpness, brilliance and darkness, surface and depth. Human beings saw themselves in that paradox. They saw their own lives, fragile yet sharp, bright yet fleeting, surface yet depth. Obsidian was mirror not only literally but symbolically. It became the image of humanity itself. In its blackness, people recognized the night of the soul. In its brilliance, they recognized the flash of insight, the spark of vision. In its edges, they recognized the blade of death. In its polish, they recognized the possibility of eternity. It endured because it was always more than an object. A stone knife could become a ritual blade could become a sacred offering could become a mirror of the gods. Each stage added new meaning without erasing the old. Even as it changed, it remained itself. Even as it entered new cultures, it carried its fire with it. Obsidian never lost its aura. It never became ordinary. Consider its journey. In the ancient Americas it was mined from volcanoes, carried by caravans, traded across vast distances. It linked city to city, people to people. Its presence marked power, wealth, connection. In burial sites it was placed with the dead, a companion for eternity. In temples it was carved into idols, a vessel for divinity. In palaces it was worn as jewelry, a crown of shadow. In battle it became macuahuitl, a weapon that could slice with fearsome precision. In ritual it became a mirror that opened into other worlds. Everywhere it traveled, it carried both death and vision. In the old world, far from its volcanic origins, obsidian still spoke. In Catalhoyuk, in Mesopotamia, in the tombs of Egypt, it was carried, polished, placed with care. It became arrowheads, beads, inlays, sacred deposits. The stone connected the living and the dead, the earth and the sky. When it reached Europe in the hands of explorers, it carried with it the echoes of Tezcatlipoca, the smoking mirror. Even Queen Elizabeth's magician, John Dee, turned to its black surface to seek angels. The stone leapt continents, yet its essence remained unchanged. It endured because it was fire made permanent. Unlike smoke, unlike ash, unlike flame, obsidian lasted. It was volcanic eruption solidified into eternity. To hold it was to hold the memory of an explosion, the instant when earth broke open and revealed its core. For ancient people this was not abstract geology. It was myth. It was the power of gods captured in a stone. It was lightning frozen, darkness crystallized, chaos transformed into form. But perhaps the deepest reason it endured is that it always balanced between life and death. Obsidian gave life by serving as knife, tool, blade, cutting wood, shaping food, protecting families. But it also took life on battlefields, drawing blood, slicing flesh, leaving bodies behind. Obsidian was companion of birth and companion of death. It was present at the first cry of the newborn, cutting umbilical cords, and it was present at the last breath of the dying, laid upon their chest in the grave. Few materials could hold both roles with such weight. Philosophically, obsidian reminds us of the human need for symbols. We do not live by stone alone, but by what we see in stone. Obsidian teaches that matter can become meaning, that geology can become theology, that fire can become vision. Its endurance is proof not only of its physical qualities but of the imagination that surrounded it. Every culture that touched it saw something more in its surface. Every people who polished it found themselves staring not only at stone, but at the mysteries of existence. Even today, in the modern world of glass and steel, obsidian retains its hold. It appears in jewelry, in healing practices, in art. It is sold not only as a mineral but as a talisman, a protector, a mirror for meditation. People still gaze into its surface, seeking clarity, balance, grounding. Museums still place it in cases where visitors lean close and find themselves staring into endless blackness. The fascination endures. The presence remains. The stone has crossed time because it is timeless. Volcanic eruptions may come and go, civilizations may rise and fall, but obsidian remains what it always has been: black, sharp, reflective, eternal. Its meanings shift, its roles expand, but its essence is unchanging. It is the same stone our ancestors held in their hands 10,000 years ago. It is the same stone that crowned kings, cut warriors, and spoke to prophets. It is the same stone that lies in graves and glimmers in museums. It is fire captured forever, earth given voice, night made solid. Why does the black rock endure? Because it is more than rock. It is memory. It is myth. It is mirror. It is the meeting point of life and death, of vision and shadow, of humanity and the divine. Obsidian carries within it not just the story of the earth, but the story of us. It endures because we endure. It remains because we remain. It is eternal because we have made it eternal. And so the story closes where it began, a shard of black stone lifted from the volcanic earth, catching light, cutting flesh, reflecting the face of its holder. Obsidian is not just a mineral but a witness. It has seen civilizations rise and fall. It has seen the dead buried and remembered. It has seen the living gaze into its depths, seeking themselves. It will see us too, long after we are gone. In its silence it keeps our memory. In its blackness it keeps our reflection. In its endurance, it keeps our eternity.